Leningrad, 1962. A man walks into a psychoneurological dispensary on Liteyny Prospect. He has not left his apartment in 3 weeks without feeling like something awful is about to happen to him. His supervisor sent him here not out of compassion, but because the man's output has dropped below quota. The doctor does not ask how the man feels. The doctor asks 3 questions. When does he wake? When does he eat? What does he do between the end of his shift and the moment he lies down at night? The man answers. The doctor writes a schedule on a card and hands it across the desk. Report to the workshop at 7. Morning exercises at 6. Evening walk with the recovery group at 1900. Follow this for 48 hours, then return. The man looks at the card. He was expecting medication, or at least a conversation about his childhood. He received a timetable. This was not unusual. The Soviet psychiatric system operated a nationwide network of these outpatient dispensaries, and their philosophy was consistent across decades. Mental distress was treated as a structural failure, not an emotional one. The mind had lost its sequence. The prescription was to restore it, not by talking about the sequence, by performing it under supervision until the body remembered what the mind had forgotten. 100 years of self-help literature later, most of the Western world still treats anxiety as a feeling to be managed. The Soviets treated it as an absence of structure to be filled. The distinction is not philosophical, it is operational, and the operation works. This video will walk through the 4 systems the Soviet Union embedded into daily life that, when extracted and combined, can dismantle an anxiety pattern in 48 hours. No app, no therapist, no revelation, a pen, a pair of shoes, and 2 days you are going to lose to your own head anyway. The first system begins in a laboratory in St. Petersburg, 20 years before the revolution, with a physiologist who was not studying the mind at all. Ivan Pavlov won the Nobel Prize in 1904 for research on digestion. The famous experiment, the one with the bell and the salivating dogs, was a side effect. He was measuring gastric secretions when he noticed that his animals began producing saliva before the food appeared. The sound of the assistant's footsteps was enough. A neutral stimulus had become fused with a biological response through repetition. What made Pavlov dangerous to anxiety, though he never framed it this way, was what happened next. He stopped pairing the sound with the food. The bell rang. Nothing arrived. It rang again. Still nothing. Over a series of trials, the dog stopped salivating. The association dissolved. Pavlov called this extinction. Modern psychology calls it the foundation of exposure therapy. The Soviets called it training. The mechanism transfers directly to the anxious mind. Your phone rings and your chest tightens. You see an email from a certain name and your stomach drops. You think about a conversation you need to have and your breathing changes. These are conditioned responses, assembled over months or years of pairing a neutral event with a threat that never fully arrived. Your nervous system learned to fire in advance, just like Pavlov's dogs learned to salivate in advance. The sequence was trained. It can be untrained, but not by thinking about it. Pavlov did not reason with his dogs. He did not explain to them that the bell was harmless. He rang the bell without delivering the food, and he did it enough times that the wiring came apart on its own. The Soviet behavioral tradition inherited this principle and applied it without sentiment. A factory worker afraid of the machinery was not counseled. He was placed at the machine, supervised, and kept there until his hands stopped trembling. The logic was not cruel, it was mechanical. Fear is a learned response. Unlearning requires exposure, not explanation. If you have spent the last 6 months avoiding a phone call, an email, or a room, you have been running Pavlov's experiment in reverse. Every avoidance teaches your nervous system that the stimulus was right to fear. Every time you refuse the bell, the salivation gets stronger. The second system was broadcast into every apartment in the Soviet Union, 6 mornings a week, for decades. Zaryadka. The word means charging, the way you charge a battery. Beginning in the 1930s, Soviet state radio opened each morning with a guided exercise program. A voice counted. Citizens stood in kitchens and factory floors and military barracks and moved. Arm circles, deep knee bends, trunk rotations, jumping in place. The program ran for about 15 minutes. Participation was expected the way showing up for work was expected. Not optional, not motivational, structural. Behind the Zaryadka stood a larger apparatus called the GTO, which translates roughly to Ready for Labor and Defense. Launched in 1931, the program established physical fitness standards for every Soviet citizen between the ages of 10 and 60. Running, swimming, pull-ups, endurance marches. You were tested, you earned a badge or you did not. The GTO was not a gym membership. It was closer to a national operating system that assumed the body was infrastructure. Infrastructure requires maintenance. Maintenance requires a schedule. The relevance to anxiety is not metaphorical. Vigorous physical exertion in the first hour after waking produces a measurable neurochemical shift. Cortisol, the hormone most directly responsible for the physical sensation of anxiety, drops. Serotonin rises. The parasympathetic nervous system activates, which is the clinical way of saying the body switches from scanning for threats to processing the environment normally. These two states, anxious vigilance and post-exertion calm, are chemically incompatible. You cannot sustain both at once. The Soviets did not know the biochemistry. They did not need to. They observed that a population which exercised before work was a population that functioned during work, and they built the observation into law. A man standing in a cold Leningrad kitchen at 6 in the morning, arms overhead, counting along with the radio, is not doing wellness. He is loading his nervous system with a chemical state that makes the next 12 hours survivable. The modern equivalent is not a meditation app. It is 30 minutes of movement, intense enough that speaking becomes difficult, performed before the first piece of information enters your head, before the phone, before the email, before the news. The body resets, and the reset holds. The third system was practiced in every psychiatric hospital in the Soviet Union, and it had a name that translates with no romance at all. Trudotherapia, work therapy. Soviet psychiatric institutions maintained workshops the way Western hospitals maintain pharmacies. Carpentry shops, metalwork stations, textile rooms, assembly lines. Patients diagnosed with neurosis, anxiety, and a range of other conditions were assigned to these workshops not as recreation but as treatment. They built furniture, they repaired equipment, they sewed uniforms. The work had production targets. The targets were modest, calibrated to the patient's capacity, but they were real. Someone was counting the output. The reasoning was plain and has aged better than most Soviet ideas. An idle mind spirals. A mind engaged with a physical task that demands coordination, sequence, and attention cannot simultaneously maintain the abstract threat modeling that anxiety requires. The prefrontal cortex can hold one demanding process at a time. Give it a shelf to sand, and it releases the catastrophic email it has been composing for 4 hours. But the Soviets added something that distinguishes their approach from the Western advice to stay busy. The work had to matter. Occupational therapy in the West often involves activities chosen for their calming properties. Painting, clay, gardening. The Soviet workshops produced goods that left the hospital. The furniture was sold, the uniforms were worn. The patient's labor entered the world and did something in it. This is the difference between distraction and purpose. Distraction occupies the mind temporarily. Purpose restructures the mind's relationship to its own output. A person who has built something real by 3 in the afternoon is not the same person who journaled about their feelings at 10 in the morning. The hands have made something. The record is visible. Anxiety loses its footing in the presence of visible evidence that you are in fact capable of producing order. If your current life contains no manual work with a tangible result, your anxiety has an open runway. Fill it. Not with a hobby, with labor that someone else will see, use, or depend on. The fourth system is the one the modern West has dismantled so thoroughly that most people under 35 have never experienced it. The collective. A Soviet citizen woke to the Zaryadka broadcast, walked or rode to a workplace where a brigade was waiting, ate lunch in a canteen with co-workers, attended an evening meeting or exercise session with neighbors. The day had almost no unstructured solitude in it. This was partly surveillance. It was also, whether by design or accident, a near-perfect anxiety suppression architecture. Isolation is the accelerant anxiety needs. A person alone in a room with no external obligations and no expected human contact will, given enough hours, begin scanning for threats. This is not weakness. It is the default mode of a nervous system that evolved to function inside a group. Remove the group and the threat detection system stays on. There is nothing to process except the contents of your own imagination, and imagination left unmanaged trends toward catastrophe. The Soviet structure made withdrawal almost architecturally impossible. You could not cancel on your brigade because your brigade started at 7 whether you arrived or not. You could not skip the evening exercise group because the group met in your building and your absence was noted. The option to retreat into solitude was not available, and so the deliberation about whether to retreat was not available either. Modern anxiety feeds on optionality. Every cancellation feels like relief and compounds the problem. Remove the option, and you remove the negotiation. Remove the negotiation, and you remove one of anxiety's primary fuel sources, the endless internal argument about whether you should go or stay. You do not need a Soviet apartment block to replicate this. You need a commitment that does not bend to your mood, a class with a fixed time, a person expecting you somewhere specific, a group that meets regardless of your attendance. The key is that the structure must be external and indifferent. It cannot care whether you feel like showing up. That indifference is the point. Now, combine the four. The 48-hour protocol is not a program. It is a temporary replacement of your existing architecture with one that has no room for the patterns that sustain your anxiety. Day 1 begins at 5:30, not because 5:30 is sacred, because starting before your mind fully boots gives the body control of the first hour, 30 minutes of hard physical movement, running, bodyweight circuits, loaded carries, anything that leaves you too winded to narrate your own thoughts. This is your Zaryadka. It does not negotiate. The alarm is the radio voice. You stand and you move. By 7, you identify the thing you have been avoiding most. The call, the email, the application, the conversation. You do it before 9, not perfectly, not after one more day of preparation. You ring Pavlov's bell and you let the silence on the other end teach your nervous system that the catastrophe was imaginary. The email takes 6 minutes, the call takes 3, the dread took 3 weeks. Write down what actually happened versus what you feared would happen. The gap between the two is your evidence. From 9 until the end of your working day, you work. Real output. Something with a deadline, a recipient, or a visible result. If your job does not provide this, create it. Build something, clean something, repair something, deliver something to someone who needs it. Fill the cognitive bandwidth. Leave the anxiety no room to run its simulation. In the evening, you are with other people, in a room, eating, walking, working alongside, not texting, not on a call, present, in the Soviet sense. Part of a unit that is doing something together in real time. You sleep at a fixed hour, not when your body feels ready, not after one more episode, at the hour you set. The circadian rhythm is not a suggestion, it is the underlying clock on which cortisol regulation, serotonin production, and emotional stability depend. An unpredictable sleep schedule is, neurochemically, a decision to remain anxious. Day 2. Repeat, exactly. The repetition is the medicine. 1 day of structure is an experiment. 2 days of structure is a pattern your nervous system can begin to trust. If this framework is doing something for you, if the vocabulary of schedules and labor and external structure fits better than the vocabulary you have been handed by the wellness industry, I wrote a guide called The Soviet Habits Handbook. Stop waiting for motivation. Start building the life you actually want. The link is in the comments. No funnel, no countdown timer. Read it or do not. There is a detail about the dispensary on Letini Prospect that deserves a moment. The doctors there did not ask patients to come back in a week. They asked patients to come back in 48 hours, 2 days, not because 2 days was enough to heal anything, because 2 days was enough to prove that the schedule worked, that the body could follow a sequence, that the anxiety, once the structure was in place, had less room than it thought. The man from 1962 followed the card. He reported to the workshop. He walked with the recovery group. He slept at the posted hour. On the 3rd morning, his hands were still. Not because the fear was gone, because the hands had been too busy to practice shaking. The Soviets did not build these systems because they cared about individual well-being. They built them because they needed 200 million people functional on a Monday morning. The motive was industrial. The instrument was sound. You do not need to admire the factory to use the wrench, set the alarm, move the body, ring the bell, do the work. Show up where others are. 48 hours. The schedule is waiting.